What Lovemaking Means to a Man by Tim LaHaye. Viewing life through someone else's eyes is the key to communication on any level. The failure of many wives to understanding what lovemaking really means to a man often leads to an erroneous conclusion that stifles her natural ability to respond to his advances. Susie began our counseling interview by grumbling, "Our problem is Bill is a beast. All he ever thinks of is sex, sex, sex. Ever since I met him, it seems I've been fighting him off. Maybe he's oversexed. What kind of man do you envision after hearing her description of Bill? Probably a copper-skinned giant, with virility exuding from every pore of his body and elevator eyes that flirt with every pretty girl who comes along." Nothing could be further from the truth. Bill is a quiet, dependable, hard-working, affectionate family man in his late 20s who is still a little insecure. When I asked how often they made love, she replied, 3 or 4 times a week. We have discovered that wives usually report more frequent lovemaking experiences than their husbands, and a dissatisfied husband usually underestimates the frequency of their experiences. By averaging their reports, we gain a more accurate figure. Actually, Bill is not abnormal. In fact, our survey and others find that he is functioning well within the range of the average husband at his age. Susie had 3 problems. She did not like sexual relations. She did not understand Bill's needs, and she was more interested in herself than in her husband. When she confessed her sin of selfishness and learned what loving really meant to him, it changed their bedroom life. Today she enjoys lovemaking, and recently she dropped us a thank you note for the time we had spent with her, concluding, "Would you believe? The other night Bill said, 'Honey, what's come over you? 4 years I chased you around the bed, and now you're chasing me.'" Doubtless, she did not have to chase him very far. The act of marriage is vitally significant to the husband for at least 5 different reasons. 1. It satisfies his sex drive. It is usually agreed that the male in all species of living creatures has the stronger sex drive, and Homo sapiens is no exception. That does not suggest that women lack a strong sex drive, but as we will see in the next chapter, hers is sporadic whereas his is almost continual. God designed man to be the aggressor, provider, and leader of his family. Somehow that is tied to his sex drive. The woman who resents her husband's sex drive while enjoying his aggressive leadership had better face the fact that she cannot have one without the other. To illustrate the physical cause of the male sex drive, let us introduce the scientific evidence that each drop of seminal fluid is said to contain as many as 300 million sperm. Since it is possible for a man to have 2 to 5 ejaculations a day, depending upon his age, it is obvious that his reproductive system manufactures a supply of semen and many millions of tiny sperm daily. If unreleased through coitus, this can be very frustrating to his mental and physical well-being. One writer has said, "A normal and healthy man has a semen buildup every 42 to 78 hours that produces a pressure that needs to be released. A variety of conditions will determine the frequency of that pressure. For example, if psychological work or family problems weigh on his mind, he will not be as vitally conscious of that pressure as when he is relaxed. Studies have indicated that men from rural areas consistently desire coitus more frequently than do men from urban areas in the same age brackets. Researchers explain that this occurs because Urbanites tend to undergo more psychological pressures than their rural counterparts. One other possibility, however, is that rural men of all ages tend to work harder physically and thus are probably in better physical condition than their urban counterparts, who may enjoy a more sedentary life. One of the most common misconceptions in the minds of young married women pertains to the sexual needs of their husbands. Because of their lack of experience, preconceived notions, and most of all their fear of pregnancy, many young wives do not share their husbands' enthusiasm for lovemaking. This trend seems to reverse itself later in the marriage, but in the earlier years the frequency of sex is often cause for conflict and disagreement. Young wives may equate their husbands' youthful passion with bestiality, not realizing that their husbands' drives are not unique, but characteristic of most normal men. These drives are the gift of God to produce the motivation for procreation, which is still the primary social purpose of humankind. That gift influences not only a man's sexual behavior but also his personality, work, motivation, and almost every other characteristic in his life. Without it, he would not be the man she fell in love with. It is a wise woman who cooperates with that need rather than fights against it. In human relations, attitude is everything. This is certainly true of lovemaking. If either person looks on it as a duty to perform, that attitude will soon be perceived by his or her mate, and it will gradually deteriorate until the passion of their love is lost. Unless they read a book like this or receive Christian counseling to change their mental attitude toward the experience, it will not be long before their love is gone. 2. It fulfills his manhood. A man usually possesses a stronger ego than a woman. If he is not a man in his own eyes, he is nothing, and somehow his sex drive seems to be intricately linked to his ego. I have never met an impotent or sexually frustrated man who enjoyed a strong self-image. A sexually satisfied husband is a man who will rapidly develop self-confidence in other areas of his life. Most men do not blame their insecurities on sexual frustration, because they are either too proud or do not realize the connection, but I have observed it so often that whenever I find a fractured male ego, I look for sexual frustration. A man can endure academic, occupational, and social failure as long as he and his wife relate well together in the bedroom, but success in other fields becomes a hollow mockery if he strikes out in bed. To the man, being unsuccessful in his bedroom signals failure in life. One loving wife asked what she could do for her husband, whose business had just collapsed. He was more depressed than she had ever seen him before, and she felt incapable of reaching him. "I'm confident he will bounce back," she said. "He's too dynamic a man to let this one failure ruin his whole life." Since she had already prayed with him and they had committed their economic future to God, I suggested that she make aggressive love to him, that she dress provocatively and use her feminine charm to seduce him. She spontaneously asked, "Don't you think he'll get suspicious? He's always been the aggressor in that department." Her response gave me an opportunity to explain that his fractured ego needed the reassurance of her love during a time of defeat. Many husbands subconsciously fear that their wives endure lovemaking out of a sense of duty or some lesser motivation. What every man needs, especially during a period of defeat, is to be convinced that his wife loves him for himself, not for anything he does for her. I knew her dynamic, choleric husband well enough to perceive that he was not complicated enough to get suspicious. Any surprise would give way to ecstasy. Later, his wife reported that he not only lacked suspicion but, within 5 minutes after lovemaking, began to share a new business idea with her. Although that idea never materialized, it started him upward. He soon found his niche and today is enjoying a successful career. One instructive aspect of this case is the fact that her husband now credits his wife with helping him bounce back. He never refers to their lovemaking experience, of course, but says such things as, "My wife is quite a gal. When I was down and out, she still had faith in me. It was her confidence that sparked my own. Actually, before she ever came to me, she had verbalized her confidence in him many times by such expressions as 'Don't let it get you down, you can start over again.' But not until she made love to him did she communicate her confidence in terms that he could understand. Much later, she offered a rather interesting comment to me. She could not remember her husband ever holding her so tightly during lovemaking. But that is not really difficult to understand. Men are just boys grown tall, and this man's failure had shaken his manhood and accentuated the boy that lurks in the heart of every man. But love once again succeeded when all else failed. Some women will probably take exception to this use of lovemaking as another example of the exploitation of sex. We prefer to think of it as the expression of unselfish love. Because of her love for her husband, this wife created an atmosphere on the basis of her husband's need, not his feelings, nor hers, for that matter. It is a beautiful fulfillment of the Bible's description of love. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, needs, but also to the interests, needs, of others. Philosophy 2:4. One woman told us, no matter what our love life consists of, there is one time each month when I always try to get my husband to make love to me the night after he has paid the family bills. It seems to be the only thing that gets him back to normal. Her husband gets an F for failing to commit his problems to God and learning to rejoice by faith, 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 18. But she rates an A for being a wise and loving wife. These stories appear in stark contrast to what usually goes on when hubby's ego is flattened by failure, debt, or problems. Most self-centered wives are so shaken by the sight of an insecure husband during a period of testing that they are ill-prepared to be a husband's helpmeet during the time of his distress. Do not be deceived by that thin coating of tough masculinity most men wear. Underneath are many emotional needs that only a loving wife can supply. The old Victorian nonsense that a nice lady doesn't act as if she enjoys sex conflicts with a good husband's need to know that his wife thoroughly enjoys his lovemaking. It seems that the Victorians did not distinguish between their premarital and their marital taboos. Naturally, a good, wholesome Christian woman will not flaunt her enjoyment of sex. That is a personal matter. Far too many insecure women are tricked into thinking that they should look and act sexy in public. That is distorted sex appeal. A truly secure woman will convey her sex appeal and satisfaction only to her husband. It gives him great pleasure and, in fact, makes his own sexual pleasure much more satisfying when he is assured that it has been mutually enjoyed. A wise and considerate woman goes out of her way to let her man know that he is a good lover and that she enjoys their relations together. It is good for his ego and promotes honest communication between them. Only a false and insincere Modesty would hide such vital knowledge from a partner. Genuine love flourishes in giving. That is why a devoted husband finds great delight in knowing his wife enjoys his lovemaking. The benefits of such love not only intensify the solidarity of the lovers, but also spill over and bless the children. A secure man becomes a better father, uses better judgment, and has an improved capacity to love the entire family. 3. It enhances his love for his wife. We are familiar with the word syndrome, but we usually associate it with negative things, like illness, depression, anger, or fear. However, it is appropriately used in conjunction with love. A love syndrome never hurt anyone, and such a syndrome is created between married partners when their lovemaking is mutually satisfying. Because a man has been endowed by God with an intense sex drive and a conscience, the satisfactory release of that drive without provoking his conscience will enhance his love for the person who makes that possible. But only one person on earth can do that, his wife. Follow our reasoning. A man's sex drive can be relieved only by ejaculation. This can be achieved by 1. Intercourse, 2. Masturbation, 3. Nocturnal emission, or 4. Homosexuality. Intercourse is beyond comparison the most satisfying means of ejaculation, but this in turn can be accomplished by the act of marriage, by prostitution, or by adultery. Only one of these, however, is accompanied by a clear conscience, married love. Our chapter of questions and answers, chapter 15, will deal with illegitimate sexual experiences, but here it must be pointed out that they all have one factor in common: although they provide biological release, they do not guarantee lasting enjoyment, because the conscience God has given to every man accuses him when he violates divine standards of morality. Read Rom 1, 2:14, 15. When sex provides only gratification and is followed by guilt, it makes a mockery of what God intended to be a very satisfying experience. By contrast, the act of marriage, when properly performed, is followed by physical relaxation based on innocence. Because sex is such a necessary part of a man's life, and married love preserves the innocence of his conscience, the woman who provides these for him will increasingly become the object of his love. Bobby was a typical Southern belle who came for counseling because she felt Joe didn't love her anymore. Although she couldn't prove it, she charged, "I'm sure he's seeing another woman." It seemed incredible that any man would look elsewhere when he had such a beautiful wife with so charming an accent. But, under questioning, it turned out that she had been using sex as a reward, rationing it out only on Joe's good behavior. Like any normal man, Joe found that intolerable. We may never know whether he was actually unfaithful, for after some straightforward talk in the counseling room, Bobby went home to love her husband unconditionally. At first, he was stunned to find his wife sexually aggressive, but in typically masculine fashion. He made the necessary adjustment. He found legitimate, enjoyable lovemaking with his wife so satisfying that he was no longer tempted to look elsewhere. One satisfied husband summed it up rather graphically when asked if he had ever been tempted to try extramarital experiences. When you have a Cadillac in the garage, how can you be tempted to steal a Volkswagen off the street? Female attitudes have been changing for the good in this area in recent years. Formerly, it was common for many wives to look upon the sex act as a necessary part of marriage or a wifely duty to perform. Now an increasing number of women view it as a God-given means of enriching their relationships for a lifetime. 4. It reduces friction in the home. Another result of a satisfying relationship between a couple is that it tends to reduce minor irritations in the home. A sexually satisfied man is usually a contented man. This will not solve major problems. It will not repair a bent fender or compensate for overcharging the budget, but it does reduce minor irritations. Many a wife has commented, "My husband is easier to get along with when our love life is what it should be. The children's jangling does not get on his nerves so much, and he finds it easier to be patient with other people." Most men do not realize that some of their unexplained irritations can often be traced to an unsatisfied sex drive, but a wise wife will remain alert to this possibility. Somehow the world looks better to a man and his difficulties shrink to life size. When sexual harmony prevails, it is as though his hard work and the pressures of life are worth it all when he and his wife consummate their love properly. More is involved in this than just the satisfaction of the glands. A man sacrifices a great deal when he gets married, or at least he thinks so. As a single man, he is rather carefree and unpressured. If he wishes to spend a night out with the boys, he doesn't have to give an account of his whereabouts or satisfy another person's interests. If he sees something he wants, he just buys it whether he can afford it or not. That all changes with marriage. Furthermore, his carefree spirit must give way to the increasing weight of responsibility marriage uniquely places on him. A woman thinks about economics occasionally, but usually with limited, short-range deliberation. The husband, however, must go to bed with the mental awareness that he is the supporter of his family. He awakens in the morning with the thought, "I'd better do a good job today, my wife and kids are depending on me." Unless he learns early in life to commit his way to the Lord, that can be a heavy load to carry. A husband of weak character came home one evening and announced to his wife, "I'm moving out tonight, I don't want to be married anymore." Our investigation revealed that he was not interested in anyone else, but he confessed, "I'd rather spend my evenings working on my racing car than on a second job to support a family." His wife admitted that their physical relationship had been minimal and that she had never shown any appreciation for the sacrifices he had made for the family. Realizing that her indifference may have contributed to his dissatisfaction and irritation, she pleaded with him, "Give me another chance, and I'll prove to you that marriage is worth whatever sacrifices we both have to make." Some women get that second chance and prove it, this one didn't. The husband went his own selfish way into irresponsibility, and both remained miserable. 5. It provides life's most exciting experience. The Titanic emotional and physical explosion that culminates the act of marriage for the husband is easily the most exciting experience he ever enjoys, at least on a repeatable basis. At that moment, all other thoughts are obliterated from his mind, every gland and organ of his body seems to reach a fevered pitch. He feels as if his blood pressure and temperature soar nearly to the point of losing control. By this time his breathing accelerates, and he groans in ecstasy as the pressure breaks forth with the release of semen into the object of his love. Words are inadequate to describe this fantastic experience. Although the aggressive nature of men finds them engaging in various Exciting activities, we know ski jumpers, motorcycle racers, jet pilots, skydivers, and pro football players, they all agree that lovemaking heads the list. A heart patient provided the best description that we have heard of what the act of marriage means to a man. Warned by his doctor that any unnecessary physical exertion could kill him. He continued love relations with his wife. At times he endured a body-rending experience of shock afterward, his heart palpitating, his face losing its color, and his extremities turning cold and clammy. Sometimes it took 1 or 2 hours before he could even get off the bed. When I suggested he might kill himself someday in making love to his wife, he quickly responded, "I can't think of a better way to go."
The most beautiful aspect of all this is that God created the experience for man to share only with his wife. If he loves and cherishes her the way God commands him, a warm and affectionate relationship will develop to enrich their entire married life. The exciting and pleasurable experience of mutual lovemaking will be shared several thousand times during their marriage. Napoleon Hill, in his very practical book for businessmen, Think and Grow Rich, betrays a common misunderstanding of the male sex drive when he cautions salesmen to limit the expression of their sex drive because it will tend to demotivate them. Nothing could be further from the truth. A sexually satisfied husband is a motivated man. Hill was probably a victim of the false notion characteristic of the past generation that held that sex demanded such a great expenditure of energy that it certainly must sap a man's strength. Unless he is speaking of an abnormal frequency of several times a day, his advice is simply not valid. A sexually frustrated man has a hard time concentrating, is prone to be edgy and harder to work with, and, more important, finds it difficult to retain lasting goals. By contrast, the truly satisfied husband refuses to waste his business day on trivia. He wants each moment to count so he can get home to the wife and family who give all his hard work real purpose and meaning. 2 letters sent to Dear Abby less than 10 days apart bring a chuckle but well illustrate our point. The first one, from an irate husband who complained about his wife's lousy housekeeping, admitted to one positive trait he liked: she'll go to bed with me whenever I want. The second letter came from a salesman who asked Abby to tell the first man to be grateful for his marital blessings. If I had a wife like that, I'd be motivated to make enough money to hire her a maid to clean the house. Maribel Morgan, author of The Total Woman 3, suggests that a man has 2 things on his mind when he gets home at night: food and sex, and not always in that order. Sex drive and thought life. The most consistent spiritual problem faced by the average red-blooded Christian man relates to his thought life. The male sex drive is so powerful that sex often seems to be uppermost in his mind. Any man in military service can testify that 95% of a serviceman's off-duty conversation revolves around sex. Dirty jokes and stories punctuated by 4-letter words become a constant verbal bombardment. Shortly after he becomes a Christian, such a man is convicted by the Word of God and the Holy Spirit to change his thought patterns. Our Lord, of course, knew this universal male problem, for he admonished, "I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Matt 5:28. Such mental adultery has probably brought more sincere men to spiritual defeat than any other single sin. Many Christian women fail to understand this male problem, and this is one reason why they often adopt such scanty dress. If they realize the thought problems that they're indecent. Exposure causes the average man, many of them would dress more modestly, but since they are not so sexually stimulated at the sight of a male body, they do not readily perceive the male response. I caught this message as a GI stationed at the Las Vegas Army Air Base. After 19 days on KP, I received what I anticipated to be the greatest duty assignment possible: sweeping out the war's barracks. To my dismay, after checking out the smallest whisk broom I could find, I found the barracks empty. All the women were working. I returned to the quartermaster for a regular-sized broom, but during the cleanup, I became aware of something rather startling. Not one nude male pin-up picture appeared in the 2 decks of that facility. By contrast, the 197 men in our barracks sported 193 pin-up pictures of girls. Not until the recent overemphasis on sex have women reflected an increasing problem in this area. But they apparently have to cultivate it. Men get it by nature. Another illustration of the fact that women seem to lack the visual lust problem occurred recently in our home. Looking through Sports Illustrated, I came upon a picture of Mr. America. As I was admiring his bulging biceps and rippling muscles, Bev came up behind me, saw what I was looking at, and spontaneously responded, "Ugh, how grotesque." Women have their own brand of spiritual problems, but mental attitude lust is seldom one of them. We have reviewed all this to make an important point. A loving, sexually responsive wife can be a great asset to her husband in keeping his thought life pleasing to God. That is not to suggest that his victory in Christ is dependent on his wife's behavior. That is never the case. In fact, God has promised to give a warm-blooded, affectionate man the grace to live with a cold, indifferent woman. But many a carnal Christian husband has used his wife's sexual rejection as an excuse to compound his spiritual defeat further by periods of mental attitude lust. A loving wife who understands her husband's temptations in this regard will restrain the desire to squelch his advances and, because she thinks more of his needs than of her own tiredness, will give her love freely to him. Her reward will be his ready response to her mood, and together they can share the rapturous experience of married love. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you like the content.